As you know, a huge part of our mission is our outreach to students. And, it thrills us to see so many of you here today. Your numbers have grown by leaps and bounds over the course of the last couple years, and we certainly hope that that growth will continue in the years to come. With us today are students and advisors from Kutztown High School, Muhlenberg Junior Senior High School, Tulpehocken Junior and Senior High School, Schuylkill Valley, and Penn State University. With that, I would like to turn things over to our immediate past president, Saul Lausch, who's going to handle the introduction today for our speakers who are going to present to us on global estuaries and the Chesapeake Bay Estuary. Saul?
Thank you. Oops, sorry. A senior moment. Just joking. No, not a Donald Trump or Joe Biden senior moment. We have a senior moment. In addition to our primary speaker, we have a young lady from Twin Valley High School who has done some study on estuaries and estuaries worldwide. Sky Graham is going to be making a presentation to us. She did this as part of an assignment in her advanced journalism class taught by her teacher, Elizabeth Siegfried, and Mrs. Siegfried is here, and we thank you for that help. This all came about with a discussion that I had with Dr. Bill Clements, who was on our board, and we discussed the idea of something like this, and he immediately thought, well, let's go to the advanced journalism class. It has worked, we know, beautifully. So thank you for that, Dr. Clements. Again, thank you, Mrs. Siegfried, and you just said to me this morning we may be able to continue something like this in the future in some way, which would be very good. I now introduce formally Sky Graham. Sky, the last note I have, and I confirmed with her this morning, she plans to major in political science, possibly at the University of Vermont, with an eventual goal of becoming a corporate lawyer. So, we think we're well prepared, and this is a surprise for us. We did not announce that we had this part of the program. So, Sky, thank you for being here, and please come up to the podium.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sky Graham. Like Dr. Lausch said, I'm a senior at Twin Valley High School, and I have a passion for environmental science. And I'm just here to give a short introduction on some of the global estuaries that I chose to talk about the significance of them environmentally, politically, and economically as well. So this is just a map of some of the different estuaries that I chose. I decided to do some on different continents just to kind of have it more rounded. So there's one in Russia, Canada in North America, and then South America and Africa as well, South Africa. So the first estuary that I looked at was the Sanya Estuary. This is in the Western Cape province of South Africa. And economically, this estuary is really important because it provides money and jobs for people in the surrounding communities around it through like bait collection and fisheries and bait shops, things like that. And then environmentally, this one's also really important because it has more species of fish, plants, and animals than any other lagoon in South Africa. And politically, this one provides more expansive opportunities for this specific area in South Africa through trade and marine and harbor developments. The second estuary that I looked at is located on the Rio de Plata. This is a river in Argentina, South America, and it's also connected to Uruguay. So environmentally, this one is really important because the lower reaches of the river support grasslands for crop cultivation, and then the middle estuary region, supports typical wetland flora such as the Amazon water lily and guama. And then some of the higher ecosystems protect rare and endangered species such as the La Plata dolphin, jaguars, ocelots, and many different turtle species as well. Economically, this estuary is really important because it supports surrounding cattle and sheep ranches, which further supports Argentina's biggest export, which is the livestock industry. And there's also many trade ports located along the estuary's sides, so that's really important for their economy as well. And politically, this one is super important because during the building of the Spanish Empire, this estuary and the sides of the estuary were used as fighting ground for the freedom of the provinces. This is the St. Lawrence Estuary. This is the second biggest estuary in the world. It's located in Quebec, Canada. And economically, this one is really important because it's a major shipping route for grain, coal, and iron. And it also supports fisheries and hydroelectric power production in Canada. And environmentally, this one is super, super important because it has a really high concentration of krill and capelin, which are vital for feeding and mating for larger mammals, such as large whales. And this one is 250 kilometers or 155 miles long. This one's also politically important because it hits a border between U.S. and Canada, so it also supports trade and relations with different countries, and also connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean, so that also supports water cargo. And then the last estuary that I have is the Gulf of Ob. This one is in Russia. It's in the Arctic region of Siberia. And economically, this one's really important because it provides also facilities for hydroelectric power like the last one, but specifically for Siberia's transportation system. It's also the centerpiece of the gas and oil economy in Russia. And environmentally, this estuary is super important for feeding and molting space for sea duck species in Russia. Politically, this Gulf specifically is historically known for being inhabited by native tribes who rely on the Gulf's land and sea for development, and also their nomadic lifestyle for clean water and resources such as those. Again, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that this was informative for you guys.
Thank you very much, Scott. I have a feeling you've never, ever seen a failing grade in your life. So very much appreciate that, and thank you for being here, and thank you all from Twin Valley for helping us with this. Earlier today, our speaker was at Schuylkill Valley High School, and he spoke to a small group of 5 or 6 or 7 people in one instance, and then to a larger group for a total of almost 50 students. And he, as I will explain, varied what he was doing depending on the situation at hand with the classes. A very engaging person. Brian Gish is the senior watershed planner with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. He specializes in integrating advanced modeling, remote sensing, and geospatial techniques into community-driven environmental planning. I don't know what that means. Prior to joining the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, he has done related work in Pennsylvania, California, Massachusetts, and Germany. And he is a fluent speaker of German, as we were engaging this morning with the German teacher from Schuylkill Valley. Brian holds an undergraduate degree in environmental geography from Johns Hopkins University and a graduate degree in environmental planning from the University of Pennsylvania. And dear to my heart, he is a 12th generation Lancaster Countian. I'm from Lancaster County, but not 12 generations. Brian, we're very glad that you can join us, and we welcome you to present to us now on the Chesapeake Bay Estuary.
Thank you. Pull up my presentation here. Need to exit out of this thing first, or just go straight into it?
Yeah, just choose it.
Okay. Yes, while working on that, I just want you guys to know, when I open up my fortune cookie, it says, "You will soon be the center of attention." So if your fortune says good or bad things, you best heed it. So they seem to be spot on. So yes, as Saul said, my name is Brian Gish. I am the senior watershed planner for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation in the Pennsylvania office. Guess I'll go right in here. Basically going to go through here. I'll give you a little introduction, a little bit more about me, and we'll talk about, I'm just going to go over here. I'm pretty loud. So we'll go through some estuaries and watersheds, just kind of talking about what they are, and specifically we're going to be talking about the Chesapeake Bay watershed and estuary.
We're also recording you for Facebook.
Oh, okay, so I guess I should go over here then.
You're all right, I got you.
Excellent. Go rogue. So, Talk about the Chesapeake Bay and its associated watershed and the estuary and how it's out of balance. From there, we'll talk about what are the assets and liabilities, what sort of things are there that we can capitalize on versus what are the things we really have to be guarded about. Talk about some of the restoration tools that we have and that have been developed to kind of address these issues. And then going to kind of tie it in a little bit more with Pennsylvania, my work. So without any further ado. So a little bit about me. Saul did kind of tell you about some of my experience. Yeah, I'm about as Pennsylvania as you get. They keep trying to get rid of us, but they keep failing. Yeah, longtime family in Lancaster County. As Saul said, I went to Johns Hopkins, University of Pennsylvania, halfway through a doctorate at Lehigh. We'll see if that ever happens. I write plans. I do science. It's a great job. I really like it. In the past, I've worked for firms that do satellite imagery analysis, some AI work. This is a lot better. I like this more. So in my free time, I go fishing a lot. It's an occupational hazard, I think, for me. And I also make furniture. And what I hope to accomplish today is, well, one, keep you entertained. I don't want you falling asleep. And two, I don't know, just hopefully you can learn something there that you maybe didn't know before, have a better idea what sort of things are happening. Now, I don't hold it against you that the vast majority of you are not in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But today, you can be honorary watershed inhabitants. All right, so let's go without any further ado. So I work for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We're the largest nonprofit association that works for restoring the health of the bay. And this is probably what you guys think when you think of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Crabs and kids going out in boats, grasses, terrapins, all sorts of things like that. But we also have a presence in Pennsylvania. We have an office in Harrisburg. That's where I work, though nowadays 4 days a week at home. We focus on Pennsylvania. I'll tell you a little bit more as we get into my work there, but our focus is clean waters here. But here's the thing. You save PA, you save the bay. So that's kind of our focus. So the bay is an estuary. As you know, an estuary, Sky did a wonderful job. Actually, give her another round of applause. I think she did a great job. So the bay is, if you're probably dating myself here, John Denver singing with the Muppets at Christmas would sing when the river, where the river meets the sea. These are very unique environments. They kind of exist. We have these freshwater environments, we have these saltwater environments, and here where you have this interface, it's a very unique set of circumstances. Certain species just thrive there, they need to be there, and it also provides certain sensitivities. This isn't an ocean species for a lot of them in there who can just run away, or even a freshwater species that can have a network of places to go. A lot of these species that are here are rather sensitive to those sorts of things. Now, you see the bay right there. This bay that we have right now, it's young. 10,000 years ago, you would not recognize it. And the reason you wouldn't recognize it is because it wasn't there. During the last ice age, so much water was locked up in glaciers that sea level was 400 feet lower. So this is what it looked like. That's what this type of, there are multiple types of estuaries. This is one called a ria. A ria is basically just the submerged, flooded path of a river, the river valley flooded. And that's the Susquehanna River running the whole way down. At present, the bay now has the James River, which empties historically right below the Susquehanna. But at the time, everything else that was in the watershed drained into the Susquehanna. So this actually, though, isn't the whole story. If we go back even farther, now there's a legacy of this. Time has flattened it out some. But 35 million years ago, something happened. A meteor actually hit the bottom of the bay and gouged a big hole. This is still, can be seen in the geology, and it also affects how the channels form at the bottom of the bay. So to give you a little sort of context there, you can see it back with what it looks like now. Wiped out a huge section. So it would have been cool to have a camera set up to see that. But so we're going to talk about the scale of the bay. The bay is big. And it's interesting, like with Sky talking about the biggest estuaries of that, there are so many different ways that people calculate it. You see them get tossed around. Oh, and then this one, it's number one. This one's number. It's always in the top three. So this little cutoff right there, it's 174 feet, it says. That's the deepest point in the bay. But this is the average depth, 21 feet. This creates an interesting sort of dynamic there, particularly with the thermal properties of the bay. When you have these very shallow areas, going to be much more responsive to solar radiation and even just atmospheric temperature fluxes. But we also have a whole quarter of the bay is 6 feet or shallower. So that's 700,000 acres. So to put that into context, there's Berks County. It's 25% bigger than Berks. So you could do a lot of walking in that bay. And if you're tall enough, you don't even have to go underwater. So it has the longest, now this one is undisputable, it has the longest coastline of any estuary in the world. If you think, why doesn't he have a number there? If any of you really want to geek out on something after this, look up the coastline paradox. It is a mathematical thing that will just tie you in knots the whole rest of the night. The area of that, it's going to be almost 4,500 square miles. That is bigger than the combination of Rhode Island and Delaware. Now, granted, I did pick the easiest ones to take a combination of to make something seem big. But just the same, it's bigger than those are. And so the residency time, which is basically if a raindrop falls into that water up at the top of the bay in Havre de Grace, how long does it take to get to the ocean? About half a year, give or take. So it takes a while to get down there. So we'll look here about some of the life in the bay. So some of these key species, obviously I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are a number of these cornerstone species. There have the striped bass. I'm going to say rockfish, so my coworkers down in Maryland don't beat me up. Down there it's a rockfish. 70 to 90%, different studies say different things, of all the rockfish on the East Coast spawn in the Chesapeake. Okay? Oysters, there are billions of oysters. Delicious oysters. 348 species of finfish. And that's what's been identified. Ridiculously as it is, even after all this time, occasionally new species are found in the Chesapeake. 173 pieces of shellfish, everyone's favorite, crabs, and of course, a whole slew of waterfowl species. And a third of the entire waterfowl that migrate up and down the eastern seaboard winter in the Chesapeake. Full third. And so we have, like I said, some of these unique conditions there that you don't find outside of estuaries. And there are very unique species and ecological communities that rely on these sort of unique estuary ecological habitats. So now we're going to look at the bay as a watershed. The bay itself, I mean, yeah, it's important, but it's just the end of the race, essentially. Whole big set of things contribute before it gets down there. So the watershed, if you think the bay is big, the watershed is huge. Okay, we're talking over 64,000 square miles. Now this one I can actually use some other states to make it sound even bigger. That is bigger than 26 states, including Pennsylvania. And you can see it actually, the 6 smallest states are about the same size of that if you combine them. So it's big. 6 states plus the District of Columbia. Talking about herding cats. 51 billion. That is the number of gallons of water that are added on a typical day to the bay. That just blows me away every time. And that's typical. You want to know about a flood? It's crazy. Over 18 million people, which is a big part of why I'm giving you the rest of this talk. 100,000 mile streams. And there you can kind of see. It's actually dominated by forest. Problem is, it's not just what your land use is, it's where it is and how it is. So some of those other ones, particularly agriculture and development, can have an outweighed effect. Every single problem I'm going to talk about from here on out is born of 2 things, and these are the 2 things. You're not going to have any sort of issue with that bay that doesn't touch both, okay? And this goes through a lot of things when you talk about ecological or environmental issues. There is always going to be a cultural basis in it, and there's always going to be an ecological one. And 9 times out of 10, it's the first one exacerbating the second, not the other way around. Nah, let me say 99 times out of 100. So I'm going to go through a couple points here, just a couple of the issues. There are so many issues, I can't tell you about them all. But we'll tell you about a few, and you can just see how our decisions as human beings, the cultures we form and how we regard resources, how they tie in to the ecological destruction that's taken place on the bay. So oysters, Chesapeake means shellfish bay. I think it's Algonquin. When John Smith, the first European explorer, well, technically Verrazano was first, but he didn't go up the whole way. So when Smith got up there, you could typically, throughout the bay, see down about 30 feet. The water was that clear. The reason why, there were so many oysters, okay? They began harvesting them, Europeans, the second they got there. Technology changed in the 1800s. Before, they would just go out with these big claw-like rakes. I've used one. It's miserable. Next, they started getting dredges. When you're pulling behind a boat, even a sailboat like a skipjack, that's the working boat of the Chesapeake, the amount of oysters you could dredge out was just unbelievable. And the oysters couldn't keep up, okay? The biggest haul was 250 million bushels of oysters, okay? This 2022, it was 930,000. So you see a drop there, and that is including cultured oysters. The population, it's 1% of what it was when Europeans showed up. And this is something that creates a bit of a feedback loop. The less oysters there are, or I should say, the fewer oysters there are, the less filtering there is. The less filtering there is, the dirtier the water is. The dirtier water is, the less likely oysters are to thrive, which means you can see that negative feedback loop that it creates. When they estimate that when Europeans first showed up, every 3 days, the full volume of that huge body of water was cycled through all the oysters. Now it takes 2 years. So those are some stark night and day, and it is all because of things we have done. Livestock is an issue, and I come from a long line of Lancaster County farm folk. It is the best place on earth. I don't want to upset you by saying that, but it's true. So they're destructive. Cows destroy everything. And hey, I drink a gallon of milk a week. I like to eat beef, so I'm culpable in this. But right now we can just see, if you go around Lancaster County, actually I'm sure you go around Berks County here, you're going to see cows in the streams, okay? So research has shown consistently that you will have better herd health if you keep the cows out. I had a farmer tell me before, there's nothing good in that creek for that cow and nothing good in that cow for that creek. And it's true. And it can a whole range of things. It can be any number of pathogens in a waterway. Now, granted, cows are a bit more robust in that regard. The rumen is a tank. But still things can hurt them. And, of course, then even just going down embankments. Cows can break their legs. It's just not good. But, we try to, we have dedicated a bunch of resources to this. But we still don't see it happening. And the reason is, convincing people to change things, even if you can make a strong case for it, can be so hard. And that goes back to the culture of these things, okay? And I get it. When you're farmers are inherently risk-averse. If you know something's working now, it's like a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. And when you know how precarious a family farm situation can be, that makes perfect sense. But by the same token, that's not the only consideration in all this, particularly when the evidence shows us, wow, we can have you thrive as a farm and kind of protect these other resources. Endangered species is another issue in the Bay watershed. Who knows what that is? Bog turtle. Yeah, the species name is Muhlenbergi. So, yes, so it was named by Muhlenberg, critically endangered. So last year, there were a record number of endangered species throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Now, I'm going to tell you, The bulk of these are plants. But plants are important too, though critters get more attention because how can you not like that little turtle? He's awesome. But the reason why, okay, let's take that bog turtle for example. The reason why bog turtles are critically endangered now, it's how we alter land. We drain out swamps, we disconnect sort of these sort of what we would call wooded wetlands and things. And interestingly enough, paradoxically, farms can actually help bog turtles, except that we often drain the areas where they are. Because meadows, bog turtles can do all right in them as long as they are saturated wetland meadows. But the more we do continued development, we fragment habitats. Like you're going to see that there, these forests are fragmented such that if you're an endangered species, if your habitat there gets to the point where it no longer sustains you, you can't go anywhere. There's nothing to connect you to it. So even if I say, wow, there's all this habitat here, well, the population of these animals here, and they can't get there, okay? And so the status right now, they're saying, I didn't do the study, but trusted people in our organization, that over a third of the forests that are privately owned right now, so this is excluding like state forests, national forests, they are at threat of being developed, okay? So it's a risk to other species. Right here's the dead zone. This thing is terrifying. So pretty much every summer now, there's a section of the Chesapeake Bay that is dead. No oxygen. All that enter die. Fish, crabs. If you have the misfortune of being in there when the oxygen level drops, you're done. So this basically, it's created by what are called eutrophic conditions. So what's that? Well, we have way too much in the way of nutrients heading to the bay. As we go out on a farm, what do the nutrients do? They make things grow. What do they do when they get to the bay? They make things grow. Unfortunately, what it makes grow is algae. Algae then dies, goes to the bottom of the bay, and rots. And then those bacteria steal every bit of oxygen. This is compounded by the fact that this usually happens in the middle of summer. What happens is, and I did this with the kids at the school, warm liquids, so if you want to dissolve, say, salt in a liquid, you heat it up, right? Well, if you want to dissolve gas in a liquid, it's the exact opposite. You want it as cold as can be. And you all know this intuitively, because if I left a can of Coke out in the sun and one in the fridge, you know the one you want. So you have this combination of hot water, just depleting the water's ability to carry the oxygen, combined with this biological oxygen demand called BOD. It just creates this horrible situation. Yep, they basically can't live there. And it's almost all the result of excess nutrients being applied to land. So nitrogen and phosphorus-based fertilizers. The disappearing islands. Now this, I will put a little asterisk on it. This is the only one of these where there is a component contributing to this that is outside of the hands of human beings. But if it were only that, we still would probably be okay. So the coastal areas, they are basically dropping a quarter inch a year. Now this is partially a sort of geologic phenomenon. Remember how I said how young that bay is? Think about if you had a sandbox and you filled it with water, and then you put a brick on top of some of the sand. And the longer that sand just sits in liquid, you're probably going to see the brick drop, just because that wet sand and wet sort of materials, it doesn't have that same cohesion, and it eventually flattens out. That's what's happening with a lot of the islands in the Chesapeake Bay. However, climate plays a big role in this too. Sea levels are going up, as well as bigger storms. So what we have now, there are multiple islands that are already gone. That picture right there is an island that only 10% is left of what was there. That island is called Holland Island. It used to have a community of over 300 people on it. Now, the last, if you want to see something interesting, look up Holland Island House. There's also a really cool song about it on YouTube. But there is this house right in the end. All the other houses, it's kind of crazy to think this. In the 20s, they said, oh, the island's going away. They took apart their houses and took them onto the eastern shore and rebuilt them. One house remained, and there's a guy who tried to save it for a decade, but you can't beat the bay. So it went in. There was a cemetery there. I took my boat out to see it, and it's going to be gone, probably in 10 to 20 years. But this is a way of life for a lot of these people and these communities, whether it's Smith Island, Tangier Island, where you have these waterman communities. They're at a half foot above sea level. I hate to say this, but unless drastic things are done, those communities aren't going to be there for much longer. I'm such a happy guy, aren't I, here with all the stuff I'm sharing? American eels. I love eels. In fact, so when I lived in the Lehigh Valley in Easton, I remember I would go and fish for eels. And my friends always asked me, like, every night you walk across the bridge and sit in New Jersey and fish. They said, we thought you hated New Jersey. I'm like, yeah, if this way I don't have to look at it all night. So, and I remember I caught a big eel once, and I was going to let it go, and it bit me. I respect that eel. So, back in the day, 1/4 of the biomass in the Susquehanna River and the rest of the Chesapeake Bay watershed was eel. 1/4 of the biomass. So, but their numbers have been in steep decline. They can't get upstream anymore because a lot of the dams. Now, granted, they can wiggle up a little better than some fish like shad. And just in case you don't know, so fish like shad, salmon, they're anadromous fish. They spawn in the headwaters, then they live their life at sea. Eels are the opposite. They're catadromous. So they spawn at sea. The little tiny eels called elvers wiggle their way up into the headwaters, and they can stay up there 30, 40, 50 years. And then one day they're just like, I'm going. And then they go to the Sargasso Sea and make baby eels. So what's been critical about this is, in recent years, we've learned an eel is not just an eel. We saw a lot of these declines in freshwater mussels throughout the watershed. It's a serious issue, because remember we were saying about the oysters filtering the water? That's what the freshwater mussels do upstream. Well, we've learned recently, so when mussels, any little shellfish, when they're really tiny, they aren't quite this immobile just chunk of thing that sits on the bottom. They can move a little bit. And what they do is, in these larval stages, they will attach into the gills of eels. And they will live there for a certain amount of time. The eels move them around. And if they don't have that stage in their life cycle, they die. So eels aren't just about eels. These weird connections that you see, that you never thought. So the bay is an economic generator. You can see here these billions of dollars in sales, 500 million pounds of seafood annually. It's huge. These are showing you statistics from Maryland and Virginia. One thing you do see in the right there, oysters. You're seeing, particularly in Virginia, a big shift to aquaculture, because the wild oysters, it's just not viable anymore. But you can see a lot of the things, whether it's oysters, crabs, striped bass, rockfish. But here's the thing. Up here, there's a lot of money too. In fact, there's more money in agriculture. Lancaster County alone has greater agricultural revenues than the Bay does seafood revenues. And I tell people this: Lancaster County, this isn't me, this is USDA, so it's not just Lancaster County fanboy saying this. These are the most fertile non-irrigated soils in the United States of America. So what does that mean? That means per growing season day, you can grow more in Lancaster County dirt than anywhere else in the country, apart from some desert areas that you got to dump a ton of water on to make it happen. It would be criminal to not farm there. But farming and farming in harmony with what's going on are two very different things, So we, as an organization, a lot of times I've been talking about farmers here. Farmers are not our enemy. They are our biggest partners, okay? But you can tell, though, if you're Pennsylvania, right there, is your priority going to be your farmers or the Bay? And we often joke that the disconnect that we have, we think we'd do a lot better if it was either called the Susquehanna Bay or the Chesapeake River. We think we would do better then. These are the three naughty words. These are the three. Now, we talked about overfishing and things like that, and it's serious, but honestly, we can address that pretty effectively with regulations on fisheries. These are much, much harder. And here's the thing. They aren't pollutants in the traditional sense. You need all of these to have a healthy ecosystem. You need it. But we have way too much. And what you'll find here, remember I was talking about the dead zone, all of these tie back to oxygen. In fact, pretty much every problem aquatic species have that isn't related to overharvesting in the Chesapeake Bay watershed is related to some sort of oxygen deficiency because of choices we've made. Whether we're choking things out by sending too much sediment downstream, whether we have things like the oxygen being stolen from rotting algae, oxygen is so important. We look right here. Here's the price of that harvest. And see, and it's not surprising where those red spots are. See Lancaster County, you see some on the eastern shore of Maryland, big chicken farms over there. And that's our food. And that's the thing. All of us are culpable in this. We ate today. We have the cheapest food in the industrialized world. Go to Japan and try to get, and this isn't to downplay inflationary pressures and how some families are hurting. But man, if you try to get the same thing of groceries here in Japan, wow, it's going to be much, much higher. And the reason why ours can be so much less expensive than that is we put it on two things. We put it on our farmers, we put the burden on them, and we put the burden on our waterways like this. Land use and water are synonymous terms. This is my favorite picture that I ever got. We do these things called Farmers to the Bay trips, where we take them down, we hook up farmers with watermen, and it's so funny. Like, I could talk with a farmer, and I can even speak some Pennsylvania Dutch, and they nod politely. I get no traction compared to what these watermen do. They're with these watermen 5 minutes, and they're best friends, and well, they realize how similar their lives are. But this is one of our things. We take them down there, but we also, so that's educating them as to the presence of the bay, because for many of them, they've never been to the bay. The bay is an abstraction. That's a thing, but it's not real in their lives. However, these practices can be, and these practices can make more money on the farm than not doing them, okay? You got to be strategic about them. Cover crops, we love it, holds all the nutrients and sediments, not all, holds more of the nutrients and sediments in place, not tilling, not turning over that ground. Doing a proper crop rotation so that you have things like legumes in there that fix nitrogen in the soil so you don't have to put on as much nitrogen fertilizer. Regenerative agriculture, where we're actually looking at the soil of the farm as an organism in and of itself, building carbon in there. And all of these things, they're pretty self-explanatory what they are. Maybe the one, strategic land retirement. What that basically means is a lot of times you've seen farmers farm right up to the creek. Those areas, if you look at them over a long duration, they tend to flood out a lot. So you're spending all this money on seed and fertilizer for that area when you're practically losing your crop every other year. So sometimes it actually makes more economic sense to stop farming it. Silvopasture, this is putting trees in pastures. And it can actually improve your herd health. They've shown the cows are less stressed. They have shade. Cows like them. And transitioning from husbandry. And you're seeing that, I think a lot of farmers are, and it's hard for a farmer to change, like the whole operation. But dairy, beef, it's very volatile in terms of what money you're getting. But if you're doing something like CSA, farmers market, you get a much more sort of, it's a less volatile sort of market, so sometimes helps. So we're trying to make it easier to do the right thing. This ACAP, our staff attorney in Pennsylvania, Tricia Salvia, she worked with Senator Yaw from, I think he's up around Williamsport. This is a cost share bill. So farmers now don't have to shoulder this burden all themselves if they want to, say, fence the cows out. They want to transition to no-till. Interesting challenge with this, though. Amish and Mennonite, or older Amish and Mennonite farmers will not take government money. So this program's kind of, we find other creative ways to do things there. And this other one, it's kind of helping PennDOT, saying you should be planting native things there. And so here's the thing. Because I have this up here and said it to you, I have to write and fill out a stupid lobbying sheet at work to say I was lobbying. So make it worth my while. Take that QR code and tell your representative, yeah, you should vote for this. I like bees and butterflies. I'll give you 1 second to take. Oh, okay. You can just look up, I believe it's House Bill 979, I forget. So we talked about the carrot. Let's talk about the stick. This is down the road from my parents' place in Lancaster County. Remember one day I went there to go fishing? Isn't that beautiful? So I'm going to talk about, this is probably I know, hang in there with me. I'm trying to go through it. This is probably going to be the most tedious part of my show, but I'm going to try to make it good. There are a number of laws and things. I'm just going to go through highlight ones. These are some ones that were honorable mentions. I can't go through every single legislative thing. I can't go through things like that kind of sparked a lot of movements like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, these sort of externality type things. So if you don't see your favorite on there, it just sometimes happens. So let's go down the timeline here. So the Water Quality Act, this is the first time that we are actually looking at water across state lines, because before it's kind of like, well, I'll do what I want here. This is my state. Chesapeake Bay Foundation, founded in, got bumped down there, 1966. No, all my little things on there. They weren't in my computer. So NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, this is what kind of led to the founding of the EPA, which you all are familiar with that. Susquehanna River Basin Commission is an interstate compact where the Susquehanna is managed between the 3 states that it's in. Hurricane Agnes. I guess I look around here, I think half of you are kind of know about Agnes, and the other half are like, who's she? So, big storm, 1972. It actually tore out half the grass in the bay. Those grass that are necessary for especially blue crabs. It took decades for that to recover from that. And I don't know if you know about this. The Conowingo Dam had actually moved 3 feet. And they actually sent guys out with dynamite to put charges on the dam to do a controlled destruction of the dam, because the surge, even though it would have been going up a channel, could have inundated downtown Baltimore. So that storm was crazy. 28 times the normal volume was coming out of the Susquehanna at that time. Okay, 72. Clean Water Act. So non-point source pollution is what we're talking about when we have agriculture. Point source, think of like a pipe. If you're a factory and this pipe is spitting stuff out, that's a point source. If you're putting fertilizer on a farm and it just kind of works its way in, that's a non-point source. So Clean Water Act, well, that was with the point source, but then some of the non-points, such as stormwater, were incorporated into that, and this MS4 program, which basically makes municipalities say, yeah, we're doing stuff. The Chesapeake Bay City, so Senator Mathias from Maryland, and he's kind of regarded as the father of restoring the bay because of this. He pushed the Senate to appropriate $25 million to do a multi-year study of the bay. And this is when we really start seeing the ball moving. And then in 1978, the Chesapeake Bay Commission was formed as a bi-state sort of group between Virginia and Maryland. Now, make a point of noting this next one. It is very important. So, this is a key point. You need to remember that in 1978. Okay, so that study, it took them 10 years, but they finally got it out, and it basically established, nutrients and sediment, like we've been saying, was the problem. They got a new agreement. This was a one-pager that basically said, yeah, we agree, we're gonna cooperate. The states in the bay, the 3 big ones. They actually then, in 1985, added Pennsylvania to that commission. And then they did a new agreement. And this one they said, you know what, in 1987, we're going to reduce all the nitrogen and phosphorus by 40% by 2000. Who thinks they did it? No, they did not come close. Spoiler. So then they did this thing, Chesapeake 2000, this guide to getting things going by 2010. In 2009, President Obama signed an executive order that actually directed more money towards the Chesapeake Bay restoration efforts and set this like 2-year sort of milestone things, that you do these things in 2-year increments so you can kind of have rapid assessment of, hey, are things getting done? What do we need to change? This one is the big one, and this is what we still operate under today. The TMDL, Total Maximum Daily Load. Brian, what's a TMDL? A total maximum daily load is, okay, So I have a healthy creek. What is the most stuff I can dump in that creek and the ecosystem that's in there can handle it? It's still okay. That's your total maximum daily load. And it's established here for sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus, the big bad three. And then you have these WIPs, watershed implementation plans. So they set these goals, we call it a pollution diet. So this is how much you can pollute. And the goal is by 2025. Who thinks we're on track? And I actually worked for Lancaster County, and this I didn't get, DEP. So every county in the watershed had to do a WIP, basically address how you're going to, what your reduction is going to be. We had to do the very first one, and we are the county that had a quarter of all of Pennsylvania's stuff. It's like, can you let somebody work out the kinks that doesn't have all the other stuff to deal with? But we did it. But the thing was, even in Lancaster County, when I worked on, well, you can see here, first it was challenged. TMDL won. So, saying this isn't constitutional. Conowingo Dam in 2015 reached its capacity. What does that mean? Well, for a century, sediment that came down, obviously some got to the bay, but a good bit was able, because the dam slowed it down and it kind of settled. The dam's full. It's full. It's not catching anymore. Now, the dam's not putting anything in there. It's just not catching it like it used to. So you're going to hear a lot of people in Maryland are obsessed with this dam. They think it is this will solve all of our ills. I take a different view of it, but so the blueprint. Like I said, even in Lancaster County, we did our best. We could not meet the requirements by doing everything we were, even being very ambitious. So my organization filed suit against Pennsylvania because hey, you're not doing what you need to do. So against EPA, because EPA was not holding Pennsylvania to it. Let me get to back in a second. And so almost at the end here, thank you for bearing with me with all these. Then the Caesar report came out last year. Basically, this thing turned everything on its head. It basically said, you're really just fooling yourselves with this TMDL. You're not going to get it. We know you're not going to get it because we see what you've done so far. Why don't, instead of doing this huge thing like this, doing everything, why don't we take this in pieces, look at different habitat issues? How do you eat an elephant, a whole elephant? One bite at a time. But then that lawsuit that I was telling you about, EPA settled with us and basically agreed to say, okay, the big bad counties that are putting in the most, we'll dump extra money in them. Okay, everybody happy? Yeah. So you made it through Brian's long list of laws. So almost getting there, I know. You guys are hanging in there. Thank you. Watershed planning in Pennsylvania now. This is what I do. This is our process. It's a crazy thing where we basically pick a watershed, we bring together, we do our best to kind of have this nexus of sort of technology, science, and the human side. I can give you the best solution scientifically. If a community doesn't want to do it, it's not going to happen. But we kind of focus, don't think about it. I essentially never talk about the bay when I'm meeting with people. It's a distraction in the conversations I need to have. It instantly makes me seem like an outsider, even though my family's been in Lancaster County 3 centuries. But these things matter to everyone, okay? You don't even need to care about that bay. And these are our threats. We've talked about a bit of them. Some of them might not be as obvious, invasive species like the snakehead and things, outcompete local fish. Here's an interesting one. See that smokestack there? They've been doing studies now in the past decade. Talk about all that nitrogen from agriculture. They've actually determined that a good quarter of what's going into the bay is coming from the air, from coal-burning plants in the Midwest. The nitrogen oxide compounds, NOx, they get up, and then they come down. So isn't that horrible? Now you can't even trust the air to not hurt your water. But we have all these tools to deal with these things, whether it's acid mine drainage, remediation, stream restorations, no-till, cover crops, fencing cows out, doing better development designs, something where you're not channeling all the water just to shoot straight into the creek. And this is what we do. We add we get this human factor in, we get this science factor in, and we write plans. We're very proud of these 2 plans. I wrote the Peckway one, Caitlin wrote the Half Moon one, and we got lots of money. So, yeah, we didn't even ask for it. Suddenly we got a call from Casey's office saying, hey, we found your plans. You want money? Okay, we'll take money, if you insist. So this is kind of my fun thing now, what I've been doing lately. I'm a technology guy. When I worked out in California, I was working for a company that basically specializes in software to analyze satellite imagery. So now we're using this to kind of make our approach even more precise. Before we're kind of like a shotgun, boom. Now this is strategic. We're sticking it right where we want. And I can using satellites for developing ways that I can tell where people are using cover crops. I can tell where people are tilling and all these things. So I know now I have limited time. I have limited resources. Everyone in this field does. We can say, well, let's go get the most bang for our buck, where it's going to work the best. Okay. So there is cause for optimism, but not complacency. We are making a lot of these connections, and that's the thing. Every bit of this, I love science. At the end of the day, I get much more mileage in my human connections and my communication than I ever do with my spreadsheets. And that is, for all of you students here, no matter what you do in life, hone your communication skills, because this is so important no matter what you want to do, okay? So that's pretty much it. Thank you. Hopefully I haven't bored you too much here. So, and if anyone has questions or anything.
Okay, we're going to come around with a microphone, I think. Dave Carroll? Dave Carroll, also past president, is going to come around with a microphone for those of you who have questions.
And we're going to use the, we're going to use Mike Sutton, the gentleman who is setting up all the technology. You heard about him from David earlier. Mike is also going to be our interim vice president. We're going to have his rules apply to the Q&A, and those rules are that I hold the mic. You get one question, and if you're a student, please identify, give us your name and the school that you're at. What school are you at?
A graduate of Wilson High School many years ago. Can you speak about the population of the bald eagle in the watershed?
Bald eagle's actually a success story over the decades. I know even personally, anecdotally, where I mean, part of me doesn't like it. He was in my favorite trout stream. But you go down, like when I was a kid, I grew up a mile from the river and never saw an eagle. Now, I can't not see eagles when I go down there. A lot of that, kind of ties back to the Rachel Carson Silent Spring stuff, getting DDT out of the stream. For those of you kids who don't know, DDT was a rather powerful pesticide, but it actually led to the eggs of birds becoming very brittle, particularly birds of prey, when they'd ingest it. So eagles are doing quite well.
Next question.
We're members of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and we get the report. How realistic are the ratings, the health of the bay that we see in the magazines?
So the State of the Bay report is kind of equal parts sort of art and science. I can tell you this, we're kind of rethinking how we want to do the State of the Bay report. I think particularly if you look at them in each individual categories, they're quantitative. Like we're looking at what the oyster harvests are. We're looking at what the striped bass harvests are and things. So yes, they're definitely, the State of the Bay report, it's sound. That said, we're looking at, for example, one of the indicators we have on there is American shad. We're like, okay, is that necessarily the best indicator at this point? Maybe we have to rethink some of that. So we're definitely thinking about it in a different way. But it's a tool like anything else. So advantages and disadvantages to it. Sorry, that was a non-answer answer.
Next question.
For those of us that aren't farmers, what personal choices, can you give us 3 personal choices that we can make in our daily lives to help the bay?
One of the biggest things you can do is buy local, particularly if you're buying direct from the farmers. Reason why? That puts more money in the farmer's pocket for growing the same crop. And farmers that are financially stable are the farmers that will do best management practices. Interestingly enough, certain things that you might think are the good thing to do in terms of some of the stuff that I'm addressing might not necessarily be. Organic farms are one of the hardest ones we have in terms of getting rid of tillage. And the reason is farms that aren't organic, what they do is in the beginning of the season, they spray their weeds with some pesticide or herbicide. Organic farms can't do that. So what do they do to limit weeds and pests? They till under the stuff. So it's a little counterintuitive sometimes. Now, they're getting much better, like work not too far from here at the Rodale Institute and things. They're working on ways to kind of sort of crush down cover crops, get things ready without spraying that on. I'm trying to think other things. You can look, certain crops are definitely more damaging than others. So don't smoke. Tobacco does a lot of damage. But yeah, honestly, if I don't know if I'll give you three, but the very big one is supporting local farmers. And it comes to, like, even when you go to the grocery store, if you're going to buy milk from, say, Turkey Hill or some other local dairy. Don't get that Fairlife junk. You know, get stuff, because the more we support our local farmers, the more money is in their pockets, and the more, like, again, if you're on a razor's edge financially, you're not going to be putting in best management practice. You're not taking that risk. But if you're financially stable, then you can say, you know what? You're not working from a position of fear in the same way anymore.
Now we have a question, I think, from a Kutztown student.
I'm Saoirse. My question is, do you think that crop rotation and organic farming are the best solutions to the nutrient excess, or what else would you suggest?
So organic and non-organic can be equally prone and not prone to nutrient issues. And that's the thing, and even kind of like we were saying here with tillage, you tend to get more tilling with organic. Now, the nice thing is you don't have a lot of these really horrible organic compounds and stuff that are put into pesticides and herbicides. But in terms of nutrients, it's all about how your farm is managed. You can do good nutrient management in a non-organic farm, and you can do poor nutrient management in an organic farm. But I will say this, you are right, though, things like crop rotations and just building soil health. The goal is the more you get your soil healthy and the more you treat it like a living organism, the less you have to give it. Start putting in things that, like legumes and things, building out carbon content, because the more carbon you have in your soil's less prone to having problems because of droughts or floods, because it can handle it. All these things, soil health is key.
Okay, now first of all, I'm going to take a question from a former speaker here, Dr. Spence Stober, who's spoken to us previously on the environment generally.
Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Are there any large-scale operations to raise oysters to filter the bay?
Funny you should say that. We have this whole thing, it's called our Making History campaign. Here in Pennsylvania, it's the Keystone 10 Million Trees. I forget how many voices there are, and I forget how many oysters there are. But we have, down in Virginia, we have a whole staff. All they do is try to build oyster reefs and those sorts of things. So, yes, there are things being done. And there's also a lot of research and stuff being done, particularly in schools on the Bay. I think University of Virginia and stuff are doing things. So, unfortunately, I don't think my alma mater
question right here.
is.
I have two. I can only ask one.
You can only ask one.
All right. So you talked about the smokestacks from the Midwest dumping air pollution into. Mm-hmm. What do we do about that?
Fight for tighter like technologies that are required to stop, because if you're burning coal, you're gonna release nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. You're just gonna. So now, thankfully, the economics of coal are moving in a direction so that it just isn't financially, even if we do nothing else, coal's kind of dying because it's not profitable. But I mean, yeah, that's the biggest thing. And the funny thing too is, like, a lot of, if you ever notice, I don't know if some of the people who are a little more seasoned have probably noticed over years, the smokestacks at coal plants got higher and higher and higher. That's because the more you shot it up there, the harder it was to kind of find detected amounts of the things you weren't supposed to have. And the reason was they just shot it up higher in the air. So,
think that question got you another one.
Good. The red tide that was in the Chesapeake Bay several years ago, was that an algae problem?
I'm not an expert on that. That's another thing, kids. Be sure to, when you don't know an answer, don't make one up. That I couldn't say.
Okay, Rodney. Rodney LaPearl, one of our longtime members and the author of numerous questions.
I actually had two also, but I'll ask one. The Lenni Lenape, the local Indians, I think traditionally had a crop rotation called the Three Sisters.
Yep,
I think
the
it was
beans, the
coined-
corn, yep.
Is that a good rotation from your point of view for farmers to use to maintain nutrients without ending up having a lot of them go downstream?
It is, but now we can take an even more scientific approach to it. We can actually look at what the nutrients are built up in there and kind of be not just every year we do this. Maybe we see, hey, we've built enough in there, we can do this crop an extra year. So, but certainly, this sort of wisdom that comes out even without having a computer like I do, that they figured that out. It's just, we're doing the exact same thing. We just have some more tools so we can be a little more precise with it.
We have another student question.
I'm James Miekle from Muhlenberg Junior High, and my question is, with the extra income that farms are getting, what are the exact changes that would be done to improve?
So he's asking if farmers get extra income, what are the changes that'll be done? And the thing is, part of that's up to that farmer. What I can tell you is a farmer that doesn't have money definitely isn't going to be doing anything. And quite frankly, even if a farmer isn't kind of implementing all the best management practices I want that farmer to, farmers work hard. Farmers are a rough life. Farmers feed us. I don't care if they have a little more money. I like that. So, but yeah, we want them to do the best management practices, like the tillage, planting trees along waterways, fencing out cows, precision feeding, precision nutrient application. And that's too. A lot of times if farmers have the money, they can hire agricultural consultants to do that stuff. You can't hire an ag consultant if you don't have the money. So it never hurts us to have the farmers not being on the edge of collapse.
Yeah, increasing development within the Chesapeake Bay watershed increases the population that affects the bay, and also reduces reduces farm agricultural land and also wild lands to allow for the development. How does that factor into the health of the bay?
It certainly does. I remember I said, the land use doesn't tell you everything because where you do it makes a difference. We're basically, I believe at present, every 4 years, the Chesapeake Bay watershed loses an area the size of Washington, D.C. to development. So now I'll tell you this, though. This is something good. Pennsylvania, over the last decade, we've actually increased the percentage of the state that's forested. You see different issues in different places. Where you really see the development issues pushing hard is in that big Baltimore, D.C. corridor, where pretty much every square inch of land they're going to try to squeeze a house in. What we say impervious surfaces, so basically concrete, asphalt, something that when water hits it, it can't get in the ground. The impervious surfaces in those areas just climbs every year. Now we have stricter stormwater laws, but just the same, there's only so much you can do. And almost all those laws, even if I'm say I require a developer to put something in, a lot of those things, whether it's berms or different things, those things have a shelf life. They're meant to last 10, maybe 20 years, and they require maintenance. And a lot of laws don't have a means to enforce that maintenance. So that's it. But up here, development is, but if I had to say what I'm going to try and focus on, it's going to be more ag. But again, it's doing things the right place, right time, because farms that are well managed are actually really great because you get infiltration. Water's not going on the surface if you have good soil health, roots holding things in place. It goes into the ground. So that, anytime you can get infiltration, get water into the ground, it's better than moving it across the land.
Great. Another question, another student question.
I noticed that when you were talking about the dead zone of the bay, that it was more concentrated towards the middle of the bay.
Mhm.
Do you know, is there any correlation that like causes that?
That's a good question. Anything I tell you would just be speculation. I work for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, but I work much more in freshwater systems. My guess would be it just has to do with where the currents are. When you're getting inflows from other places versus water that's kind of, I don't say stagnant, but more resident water that just kind of sits there and festers. But that's just speculation. I couldn't say.
So I actually have one final question before we wrap up the Q&A. So this question perhaps is for both Sky and for you, Brian. Sky identified a number of international estuaries for us, and I'm wondering the issues, the cultural and ecological issues you've identified that are impacting the Chesapeake Bay. Are those issues transferable to other estuaries around the world? I mean, are they suffering from the same type of negative impacts?
Some are much worse, particularly in areas like a lot of places in Asia. You look at like the Yangtze Delta, stuff like that in China. Just catastrophic sort of issues, just because, I mean, and it's easy for us from a Western standpoint to say that because we've had more money, we didn't have to play catch up, you know, in terms of development and getting living standards up. But just the same, they've done that with horrible consequences for water. Three Gorges Dam and things like that, just, but yeah, some of those places, some of the ones in Asia are pretty rough. A couple of them in, I'm trying to think, in Western Africa again, it's just, they don't have infrastructure to treat a lot of waste and things like that. They have a ton of people. So in essence, they're kind of they have the same problems we have, they're just supercharged. So, because more people and less resources.
Okay, great. So thank you to both Sky and Brian. We have gifts for you both.
Aww.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our gifts are pottery plates that are custom made for the World Affairs Council of Berks County by local artisans. So thank you very much for your presentation. Before I identify our next presentation, I do want to say to Sky, there is a future for you in combining your passion for environmental science and environmental law. I am an environmental lawyer. I've been practicing environmental law for over 30 years, primarily on the corporate regulatory side. And I deal day in and day out with fellow private practice environmental lawyers and in-house counsel practicing environmental law with large companies. So good luck to you. I hope things pan out. I will end with the announcement of our next presentation. It will be on March the 13th, Wednesday, March the 13th here. The title will be United Nations World Population Issues with an Emphasis on Women's Issues. And our speaker will be Dr. Lena Basowski, who comes from the UN in New York. So hope to see many of you back here on March the 13th. Have a great day, and thanks for coming.